now heard the new idea of just Long Wharf. We will have a few 30-minute spaces on Long Wharf. I believe it's the first 4 on the right, past the handicap spot, which will be free forever at 30 minutes. Handicap spots, there are 3 or 4 of them on the wharf. Those will be free, and everything else will be charged for after the first hour. So do we have, Aiden, is there anything you want to add to this, or?
No,
we need a motion to open the public
Oh,
hearing.
I'm sorry.
That's
Can I
okay.
get a motion to open the public hearing? Thank you.
second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion, Aiden, is there anything you want to add?
No, just to remind everybody that parking, paid parking will be from roughly Memorial Day to Labor Day. It'll be after 10 o'clock in the morning. First hour is always free. It's going to be app-based, but there's going to be a telephone available at the harbor master's office on the wharf, so that people who don't have a phone, came out without a phone, never had a phone, can participate. The TCOs on the wharf will be there to help, and we will have soft enforcement in the beginning so people can get used to this new idea. Other than that, I think you said it all, Mayor.
I have a question. So that's the other change, Aiden, is that it's going to go from Memorial to Labor Day, not Memorial.
Actually, sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm wrong. It's a Memorial Day to Columbus Day. Thank you, Tom. And also, first responders are the only members of our community who will have a discount to the point where it's free for first responders.
The only other question I had, I think you might have answered it, but I looked at the resolution. I looked at section D, which excluded, said except for fire by order of the fire officer or police chief. I believe it says, Denise, that
Yes.
So in an emergency situation, our first responders, they're not going to have to sign on the app. They're not going to have to worry about any of that stuff. They just do what they got to do.
No. And in addition to the local law that you have before you,
Right.
we'll also have a resolution that spells all of this out in detail, like the nitty gritty of it.
Gotcha.
And I started to draft that today, and I put in there that the fire department and the ambulance members are, they can park for free, and they can also park and not be ticketed if they go over the the time limit, if they're responding to an emergency event. So, so you'll see that at your next meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have anybody who would like to comment from the public?
Before we go public,
Yes.
if I may,
Yes.
Aiden and I have had a discussion about this. A concern about where the money will go. There's quite a bit of language in section 1 legislative intent, which accurately reflects the rationale for this enterprise. My concern is it does not create a receptacle for the money other than to go into the general funds. And all of the purposes that are recited here, they're all transportation and other infrastructure related, and that's very appropriate given the source of the funds. And I would like to recommend that we create a separate, segregated fund. I would call it the 21st Century Fund, something like that, where these revenues would be fully dedicated and received by a fund created for this purpose. And if we do it with the tutelage and the input of our bond counsel, and as we know, the village is represented by probably the premier bond counsel firm in the country, if not the world, and create an infrastructure fund based on these revenues, it would give us, among other things, the capacity using revenue anticipation to fund out larger projects. In the world of larger projects, pay as you go is very awkward. It doesn't always work. It's people buy houses, and we've had to use bonds for the wharf and so forth. But with a dedicated fund, with a secure revenue stream, and I think a parking revenue stream would be a secure stream. I haven't been wild about doing it that way, but if we're going to have it, let's put it into a dedicated fund that is eligible for revenue anticipation financing. It's a chore to get that done. It's above all our heads, but we have through bond council the capacity to do that. It's done commonly and it's done routinely. And that would be my first suggestion. The only other thing I want to touch upon is that in that same paragraph, that recitation, and I think I saw it earlier from something from the engineering firm, saying that it's important to note that New York State does not consider Long Wharf to be a public right-of-way, but instead a village-owned parking lot. I thought we addressed that 2 or 3 years ago, and we dated it back to the first, when we took the wharf from Suffolk County, that the historic research showed that it was a street, that it had a name to it. It was reverted to being a village street at that time, at least that's my recollection. And I think there are important reasons why, if it is a street, we not state otherwise. My purpose when I raised this a couple of years ago was trying to have the wharf, windmill, and Steinbeck seen as a common entity for the walkway. And secondarily, to get PSEG to recognize it as a street, because they would have had to make a higher contribution to the additional electric work we were doing. So I just want to reopen that question as well. But I think these are two important lines of inquiry that will make what is intended here stronger and more secure, and give us a financing mechanism that is not a general obligation of the village. It's a separate, independently, not independently from a governance point of view, but from a fiscal point of view. So those are the two suggestions I'd like to make as we close in on this.
Kathleen, if I may, as is often the case, Jim has articulated my thoughts better than I can. I agree wholeheartedly that these funds, and I think that was the intention from the get-go, would be ring fenced. The stronger that ring is and the higher the wall is, the better, so that we can make sure that these funds are used for transportation issues in perpetuity. And as we move ahead, as Jim said, pay as you go is not the greatest way to go for large infrastructure projects. And if we have a regular and predictable source of income, it gives us the flexibility to tackle some of the bigger issues in the village that are just not going to get done out of the current account. So I totally appreciate Jim's support there, and hopefully that's something that we can do.
So I just want to note that I researched both issues because the first draft did have the funds going into a dedicated fund, and I had listed out what I perceived to be the rationale behind the law and where you would want to spend the money. But when I conducted the research, this state law said that we were required to put it in the general fund. So I then confirmed that with our budget officer. And so from there, maybe it can be put in a segregated fund. That's sort of over my pay grade at this point. I haven't researched that far, but in terms of adopting the law, I was required to put in that it would go into the general fund. And I also researched the issue about Long Wharf being a street or a parking lot, because the way you can charge or not charge is very different for both of them. And so I asked D. Yardley about it, and he got a memorandum from the Department of Transportation stating what you recited, Jim. So I did look into both issues and put in there what I understood to be the correct answers, but obviously open to looking at again.
Right. Thank you for that. Let me ask that you have a conversation with bond counsel. The
Absolutely.
Hawkins Delafield people. And I would be more comfortable if that's the outcome and they confirm it, and there's a secondary routing of such a, in other words, to the GO and then
Right.
off to a segregated fund. That might be the solution. The key is to get it in a form where the revenue, the anticipation of the revenue is bondable. That's
Got
where
it.
you get to
Yeah.
Okay.
project. With regard to the, I would like to see what my old department sent you on the.
Sure. I will
I'd like to
circulate
see-
that.
Okay.
It may not have made it into the packets, but I intended for it to be attached. But I will definitely forward it to you.
Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Are there public comments on parking on base?
I just have a question.
Yes, Mr. Potter, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, hi, this is Adam Potter. Sorry if the glare is not coming out very well. Good evening, Mayor and trustees. My question is the village trustees, are you considering any other paid parking in the village at this time? Or are we waiting to see what happens on the wharf before any additional paid parking will be considered?
The wharf is going to be a soft launch for our paid parking. We hope we can expand it, but it will be the soft launch and we will see how it goes.
So you're not considering any other paid parking items at this time?
I'm still considering Main Street, but I was told loud and clear that I had to stop considering it. So I have stopped considering it for the time being.
This is a really big move for the village, and I think we really need to see how this summer works out. You know, if it's a complete disaster, which I doubt, but we're not building any infrastructure, then if it doesn't work, we'll just fold our tent and move on to the next idea. I don't believe that'll be the case. So right now, we're in the wait and see mode.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thanks. Are there any other comments? I gather we seem to be able to just,
Close the public hearing if you'd
well,
like.
no, I'm saying, I gather people can just unmute themselves if they want to, rather than waiting for us to see a hand. I do not see hands, but that's, okay. So if there's nothing else, can we close the hearing, please? Can I get a motion to close the hearing?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Thank you.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And so Denise, we will have a resolution to vote on at our next meeting. Is that the case?
No, I'm sorry. Yeah, no, you have your local law to approve tonight. The resolution is secondary and lays out so every year you'll probably relook at it and you might change what you're charging. But the local law is drafted and on the agenda.
Then can I get a motion to vote on the local law, please?
Just a point of order, a question.
Mhm.
We brought this forward on February 9th. This version.
We noticed it on, was that the date? Yeah, February 9th was our last meeting.
Okay, and this would be considerably less than 30 days to
Yeah,
pass
it's
tonight. Can we push it over to whatever meeting we have closest to 30 days, particularly
March,
these
March
questions
9th.
out there?
28 days.
Sure.
March 9th is our next Board of Trustees meeting. That would be 28 days later. Because it's a February, March combo.
Well, that'd be closer than 15 days, so.
Okay.
I would propose we put the vote over till then, and while we sort out these questions that somebody raised here tonight.
Who would that someone be?
I have no idea.
Okay, so yes, we can push it
You can do
to,
that. I'll second that.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. So Beth, this will be added to the agenda for March 9th. Thank you. And Denise, we'll have, as you get answers, if you can just respond to all of us.
Absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. Okay, our next is the proposed Sag Harbor Waterfront Overlay District conversation. We have Valerie Monistra, I'm sorry, Valerie, never gonna get that right. Taylor Garner, Marta Goldsmith, and I assume we probably have Chris somewhere, and I'm just not seeing him. But we got roughly 50 pages worth of comments on the waterfront zoning code. And Taylor Garner from Nelson Pope did a fantastic job of culling them down, going through, taking ones that were repetitive and merging it into one question, taking ones that were just needed clarification and clarifying it, etc. We then took those, what came down to 17 pages, and went through it as the Waterfront Planning Committee and looked at each one of these comments. And have made recommendations. So Valerie now is going to take the entire Board of Trustees through the 17 pages of comments. It goes quicker than you think, I promise, maybe, and tell you what the Waterfront Committee is recommending in regards to editing, amending, and or leaving as is. So I thank you, and introducing Valerie.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of housekeeping. I'm going to need to share my screen as well as potentially Taylor. So if you can make that available, thank you. So I thought I'd start off briefly for the public and also a little bit of information for the village board as to where we came from and where we are in terms of the process with the public comments. On February 9th, we presented the draft code to the village board. The village then held a public comment period of the draft code till February 16th. And as the mayor said, we compiled all of the comments received and sent them both to the committee and the village board. In addition, we provided the Waterfront Committee and the village board a document that I will be presenting tonight that summarizes the public comments on various topics, how the draft overlay addresses those topics, and any recommended changes to the draft overlay as a result of the public comments. Tonight, I will be presenting the public comments received as well as the recommendations from the Waterfront Planning Committee. I'll be seeking village board input into the recommended changes to determine if the next version of the waterfront overlay should include any of the recommended changes or public comments that we received thus far. I also want to highlight two topic areas that are still being reviewed. The first is the traffic demand management. Since the traffic demand management code provisions were posted after the draft waterfront overlay, the village is extending the public comment period on the traffic demand management. And I believe, Mayor, till March 3rd, is that correct?
March 9.
March 9th, thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, comments.
Yes, comments.
March 3rd.
March 3rd, yes. So at which point we will undertake a similar review process as we are currently with the comments in the draft overlay. The second topic area that's still being reviewed is the waterfront use table. The committee needs additional time to review the public comments received on the uses, and that will take place within the next couple of weeks. So once we have a version of the overlay and the traffic demand management strategies that includes all the initial revisions based upon the first public comment periods, the village board will call for a public hearing on the draft overlay and the traffic demand management. And the public hearing process will then provide another opportunity for public comment, and the village board another opportunity to make any revisions it deems necessary based upon public comment. So that is basically the process that we'll be undertaking over the next, I guess, 2 rounds in the next month or next couple of months. So with that, I'm gonna, if there's no questions on that, I'm gonna go right into the document that we prepared for the village board and then walk you through the recommended changes from the Waterfront Committee. Great, I'm gonna just share my screen now. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay. So the first topic area that public comment was received on was really Historic Preservation and Architectural Review Board authority. Specific public comments revolved around the waterfront. The waterfront overlay is located within an historic district, and concerns were specifically expressed that the adoption of the waterfront overlay would negatively impact the Board of Historic Preservation Architectural Review's duty to evaluate form, architectural style, and materials. So we provided the village board information that, and also for the public, that the waterfront overlay does not replace the overall responsibilities as well as architectural review from the board of the Historic Preservation and Architectural Review Board. The overlay specifically does not exempt any property or any application from appearing before this board as currently required. And so the Waterfront Planning Committee recommendations concerning this particular the comments that were raised was to add a clarifying statement in the waterfront overlay indicating the review and recommendations from Historic Preservation and Architectural Review Board will not supersede any of the provisions of the waterfront overlay, and then also add clarifying statements to the building type illustrations that the architecture depicted is intended to be representative of the existing character of the village and is not specifically intended to identify or direct the architectural images of a particular building. So I'm going to turn this over to the village board. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts or comments on that recommendation from the Waterfront Committee before I proceed?
I think it's important that that's in there. Yeah, I think that that's certainly something that needs to be added, and it clarifies where the boards stand and in reference to the waterfront planning, and I think it's proper.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
Agree.
I agree, absolutely.
All right. So we're now going to go on to the next topic area. So land uses. So this in particular, I'm just going to highlight just really quickly the overall comments that we received so far. And as I just mentioned, we will be looking at the proposed changes to uses, and we'll provide the village board an update to those particular proposed changes once we have a little bit more time to work with the committee and identify those particular changes. But overall, the feedback from the public indicated that maintaining a mix of industry, commercial, as well as retail uses is important. That preserving the working waterfront is important to the community. And it was also recommended that waterfront parcels be developed with water-related businesses and public open spaces and residential uses should be prohibited on the waterfront. This is all consistent with the recommended waterfront overlay. Specific concerns relating to the waterfront overlay included requests for clarification regarding the definition of institutional offices and why they're listed with civic buildings, concerns that increasing indoor seating of restaurants for restaurants without required additional parking will impact existing restaurants in the remainder of the VB district. Some special exemption review processes have been eliminated, and it wasn't clear why this was done. So one of the tasks that the committee is going to look at is some of the uses that we identified from moving from special exemptions to a permitted use, whether we need to go back to special exemption uses for those particular land uses. Civic buildings should have limitations on the percentages of accessory uses allowed to ensure that a principal use is a civic use. Also, concerns were raised specifically dealing with the OD district, whether permitting additional retails would exacerbate traffic and parking problems, or the additional retail uses could harm the existing retail that exists along Main Street. Also, specific concerns for the use table dealt with traveler combinations, in addition to residential uses, should be excluded. We should not change museums to a permitted use in the VB and waterfront districts. Do not change public libraries to a permitted use in the VB and OD districts. Do not change hotel to a special exemption use in the VB OD districts. and do not change laundromats to permitted use in the VB district. So the Waterfront Planning Committee, as I said, is going to be looking at the uses in a little bit more detail, but there are a couple of recommendations that have already been identified by the Waterfront Committee. And one deals with, right now in the code, we have, and we do allow for hotels, but they're supposed to be boutique hotels with a maximum of 10 guest rooms. So if the committee recommends adding the maximum guest room standard directly to the use table and changing the use from hotel to boutique hotel, because the committee agrees that on the public comment that, yes, we do not want large scale hotels in the waterfront overlay, just that we are allowing boutique hotels, which have, again, a maximum of 10 guest rooms. The other comments, the other recommendation that the committee agreed to was that for civic buildings, to clarify the process for when a civic building is converted to another use, especially if that use is not a civic one. Because if you recall, in the waterfront overlay, civic buildings have different design standards than mixed use buildings. And I think the concern from the committee and as well as the public was that civic uses should be primarily civic buildings should be primarily used for civic uses. But if for some reason that particular building now that had a civic use ends up selling their building to another buyer, how would that change of use take place? So that clarification will also be is being recommended to be worked into the overlay.
Val, you take the question here?
Yep, absolutely. Sorry, I have you'll have to let me know if somebody's raising their hand because I have it minimized so I can look at the screen.
The item 1.
Yes.
Where does the advocacy for hotel as a use come from? Whether it's big or 10, was there advocacy in the process for adding hotels to the waterfront?
There was in some of those in this, just only for boutique hotels as an option for some of the waterfront properties. There wasn't a huge public request, but it was, again, we're looking at providing a little bit more flexibility within the uses. And one of the thoughts was that some of these mixed use buildings could have a potential boutique hotel associated with their building.
And what would be the rationale for that?
Well, the rationale would be
adding hotel room inventory to the waterfront. What would be the reason to do that in the planning, in the world of planning? Why would we want to do that?
Well, I think the real issue is we wanted to provide flexibility so that the market can really drive what is needed for what uses would be marketable in those different locations. So it was, I believe the committee was looking for that flexibility, but didn't want the waterfront overlay to supplant the resort zoning. And so it really was looking at creating boutique hotels as opposed to large scale hotels. And I don't know if Bob or Mayor, if you would like to comment on that as well.
Well, I think we wanted to, the overarching goal here is to have a mix of different uses. And this is a probable or a potential use that someone might come up with. And therefore we wanted to try to limit it to a certain size. And these are, a lot of these, the waterfront moratorium area is actually sort of a microcosm of like, say, a city. And so there are really only a few parcels that some of these things may or may not apply to. And I can't go into detail about which is which, but if you think about what may be potentially developed down in the waterfront, this was to address that. And in essence, try to guide the development in that direction. So something big doesn't come in ultimately. Hilton Hotel.
In the current code, Bob, we do, at least in theory, would allow a hotel by special permit in the current code. But does that speak as written? I don't have it handy. To the size of a hotel under the current, if they could qualify for.
Oh, that's the point. The current doesn't.
Yeah.
And so this is why we put this in to essentially limit it.
But it does allow for a hotel under special exemption.
No, it doesn't. The
Doesn't.
hotel use is not allowed in the VB or OD district at this point.
Even with a special exemption.
That's correct.
Oh, I misread what's there. And so making it a approved use, we can just come back to the language that it says allows hotels, it's the overlay table. So the
Yes.
existing code doesn't allow them under any circumstance.
That's correct.
And this would change that to allow them, but at this boutique size.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
The model being the American hotel, which is, out of the resort motel area and yet works quite well and is a different kind of feel than what you would get at a Barron's Cove or at a Sag Harbor Inn or anything. It's a more boutique hotel. It's similar to what a number are doing in Greenport. So that's sort of the model that we were looking at of if somebody wanted to do something of that size and scale, that would be feasible.
So are there any other questions, comments? Does the board agree with these recommended changes to the code?
I'm not there yet.
Okay.
So Jim, just to clarify, you're not there as in having it in at all, not to limiting it to 10.
We're going to the use table next.
Yes.
Nothing was available. So I
I-
want to see it in the full context of.
I understand.
use in,
That
use
will come
design,
back
and so
up in
forth.
the-
Absolutely. So we'll come back on this use issue. Okay. So I'm going to go on to the next topic area, if that's all right with the board.
Yep.
Okay. All right. So. Okay, so now the next topic is heights. So concerns were expressed that the existing view corridors would be lost as a result of the waterfront overlay. Additional concern was related to increasing the height in the OD to 35 feet. But we wanted to make note that the existing height in the OD district is currently 35 feet, but we are suggesting to allow for an additional story where currently 2 stories is allowed. We're suggesting 3 stories. The draft, the comments came in with concerns with what we're calling chimneys, mechanical equipment, other rooftop equipment. There is specific right now in the draft overlay allowing 20% of mechanical exemption on rooftops that would be allowed to exceed the height of 35 feet because of the mechanical equipment. And so concern was expressed that that might be excessive as it permits numerous roof items. The question was also raised if balconies with views and rooftop decks on mixed-use buildings with water views would be permitted. There was also concerns that the height zones be modified so that the parcels adjoining or across the streets from the public parks, as well as parcels northwest on corner of Main Street and Meadow Street. And I'm going to show you a map in a minute. So that those be limited to 2 stories. And then a few other comments came in with FEMA flood rate requirements that should be allowed to increase maximum height, building height, recommended increases in the height of civic buildings to 40 feet instead of the currently 35 feet, a proposed measuring height to the midpoint of the pitched roof, and then also proposed an increase for mechanical equipment coverage to 60% of the floor area. Those were the public comments we received on heights. And just for the board's clarification right now, the current zoning allows a maximum of 2 stories in the OD and waterfront districts and a maximum of 3 stories in the VB district. The maximum height currently permitted in the VB, OD, and waterfront districts is 35 feet. The waterfront overlay also proposes the establishment of 2 height zones. Sub-zone A is located south of Bay Street and Long Island Avenue and permits a maximum of 3 stories, 35 feet. And any portion of the building above 25 feet is required to have a 10-foot upper story step back so that the massing will feel like a 2-story building from the sidewalk. And then also as drafted is subzone B, which is located north of Bay Street. And this permits a maximum of 2 stories, 25 feet, which represents an overall reduction in the permitted height. However, applicants can apply for a height bonus in exchange for public access through the site to the waterfront parks and additional community benefits to allow for an additional 10 feet of building height with a 10-foot step back for, again, a maximum height of 35 feet and 3 stories for the project. So projects can meet the bonus criteria. So this map that I wanted to show you, because this is one of the recommendations from the committee. If you can see here, this is the zone A. Right, zone A, which allows for a maximum of 3 stories, 35 feet, which is the dark purple. The comment came in that the properties located in the blue dotted boundaries, that those be reduced to a maximum of 2 stories. And the committee recommends that those changes be put into place in the next version of the waterfront overlay. The subzone B is which I was also referring to. This is the area and the lighter purple, which has a maximum of 2 stories, 25 feet. With additional height bonuses that is possible up to the 3 stories, 35 feet. The other couple recommendations that came in from the committee was to reevaluate the requirements for mechanical equipment on the rooftops and consider limiting the maximum height allowed for that mechanical equipment, just to ensure that we really are adhering to the maximum heights that are being proposed as part of this waterfront overlay. And I believe that concludes the comments from the committee dealing with the heights. So are there any questions from the village board on this? And what are your thoughts on changing the required or the maximum heights on those particular properties as identified along Bay Street and also Long Island Avenue?
I think that's great. I think that's one of the best things we're doing right there.
I have a question.
Sure.
So in subzone B, you can build a 3-story building, maximum 35 feet.
Right.
If you give the bonuses, in other words, if you qualify for bonuses, which are more public access to the waterfront.
There's more public access to the waterfront. And actually, I'm going to turn this over. Taylor, can you just read so I don't have to keep moving back and forth on this?
Sure. Just get to the page.
So the public access is the mandatory plus additional bonus.
Right, but the public access, right, and it's public access, right? We do have, and we're going to get to that in a minute, there are certain waterfront or visual access points that have to be incorporated in any sort of development. But this would then be public access.
This is Trustee Corey. How does subzone B allow more access to the waterfront? Am I missing something?
So subzone B.
How could you bonus out more access to the waterfront on
Sure, that's a good question. So there, for example, you could have walkways along the waterfront, right? That will meet up with your surrounding parks. You could provide some additional, courtyards, or in your visual access yard, allow for the public to use it as recreation or passive recreation.
So my question, yeah, that Aiden actually asked my next question. I'm glad he did. And my other follow-up with that is, who would maintain that and who would be responsible
So
for that?
that's a good question. A lot of times in these types of scenarios, there are maintenance agreements that are, worked into the overall development that requires that the the property owner maintains those public access ways. Other times, not to say that this, but these are different solutions that I've encountered dealing with these types of public access. Sometimes the community decides to take it on as another public park or public access way, but a lot of times it's usually maintained by the property owner.
In the reclassified properties as outlined in blue, what could they offer if they wanted to participate in this bonus height? They can't offer access to the water, or they can't offer really an awful lot, can they?
Right. Those would be limited to the 2 stories. So they would most likely not have the bonuses applied to those.
It was also to ameliorate the visual impact of the
Right.
structures in this area. I mean, there's a general sense that the water's right over there, that you could see it or sense it.
Taylor, did you want to read those?
Can I just,
Oh,
sorry,
sure.
Taylor, but the public access, that was put into our LWRP 12 years ago, that was a goal of the village, was to create this public access walkway that would go from Cor Maria all the way down to the boats, the A dock, B dock, C dock. They, it is a very lofty goal, but this is one more way to get to that goal, because that is something that we've wanted for 12 years, is a walkway along the waterfront. So this way, by putting it into the zoning, it gets us there faster than by putting it into the LWRP, which we couldn't then make happen without a little bit.
Question?
Sure.
Just a quick comment, just for accuracy. On the sketch, the park to the west of the wharf is not another marine park. That's Windmill Park or Windmill Beach.
Okay.
You just correct that. And this applies to all the areas we've covered so far. In the packages that came today or will come, when you say the committee or the advocacy was for this or that, will we see with any specificity where that came from? It's interesting. It would be interesting to me know who is advocating for this, not specific personalities, but what sectors or what people were advancing this or that idea.
So you have, as part of your packet, all of the public comments. And so you can review the public comments. Like I said,
The packet came today?
Yes.
Oh,
So
okay.
every public comment that we received is part of your packet, and it's actually been posted just for the public. It's also posted to the website if it hasn't. I believe it was posted today to the website.
We'll get it. That's really what I
Yes.
was looking for.
Yes. You will have, as part of the packet that you received tonight, you have all the public comments, which is what the report summarizes. So you will see within the public comments.
We're just
send
useful
it
to know
and
who is pushing for this. who is
Absolutely.
pushing-
Yep.
Thank you.
Taylor, go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Sure, no problem. So for the height bonus, one thing just as a process aspect of it, any height bonus would be required to have a separate public hearing for the planning board. That's in the draft as it's currently written now. And as the mayor mentioned, the first criteria for trying to achieve a height bonus is to provide the public access. That's not optional, that is required. And the second piece, we have a list in the code where property owners would have to select 3 of the options from the list to finish their qualification for the height bonus. So those include items such as green building systems, sustainable landscapes, preservation and adaptive reuse of historic resources. One of the ones that's currently on the list now is public art, but we have had feedback about that, and I believe Valerie will talk about that
Yes, that's the next
in the
one.
next section. Another one is accessible buildings and sites exceeding the minimum standards of the USAB, the United States Access Board. Let's see what else. Renewable energy production, water conservation, restoration of habitats, native vegetation, shoreline buffers, floodplains, wetlands, and finally additional facilities for public recreation on the waterfront, in addition to just the access. So I believe things helping people to actually get into the water, what we had in mind there, kayak launches or things like that. And that's the list as it currently stands.
Okay. Thank you, Taylor. So with that, there's no other comments or questions on this piece. I'm going to go on to the next topic area. Great. So the next topic area, and Taylor's is a good segue. This deals with the actual height bonus process. So some comments came in, some concerns were expressed regarding the potential for height bonus to provide loopholes. The request was made that no bonuses were given for open space, visual access, or physical access to the water. And that is correct. They are not being given for that, any required open space visual access to the water, just for public access. Regarding the process of reviewing and approving height bonuses, it was recommended that the planning board should review these requests, and an ordinance may need to be adopted, giving them the authority to negotiate items like height in return for items benefiting the public. In addition, it was recommended the planning board's lawyer should draft any access restrictions or open space covenants, which would be recorded therefore and part of the conveyance of the property at a later date. It was also recommended that the approval for the height bonus be modified so the planning board and zoning board both have oversight, and specific comments related to the proposed height bonus language in the waterfront overlay included public art should be more clearly defined, provide for a bonus upon developing a village approved architectural features such as such as or similar to a building mounted tower, clock, or windmill, and consider a height bonus to comply with FEMA regulations. So Taylor just went through basically our height bonus process. So I'm going to skip to the planning committee recommendations. So the committee recommendations included incorporating input from the Historic and Architectural Review Board on height bonuses into the review process, provide additional criteria to assist the planning board with review of any proposals for a height bonus. And this includes like specific criteria so that it's more clear to the planning board what they're weighing, both the benefits as well as benefits of the bonus, as well as the benefits of the height to the property owner. And then remove public art as one of the potential public benefits that is considered for evaluating the height bonus, because there seems to be, public art, it's very subjective. And the thought was at this point, it was probably best to remove that from one of the categories to be considered.
I have a question. Sorry, before you move on, you mentioned previously there, you spoke of a height bonus for FEMA regulations. Could you expand on that just a little bit? Because
so that was a comment from a public asking for the height bonus. What we did as part of this, and I can turn this over to Chris to talk a little bit more about the design standards, but we took that into consideration and incorporated it into the overall building forms. And Chris, did you want to just touch upon that a little bit?
I think Chris covered that at the last meeting.
Yes. So
you're I just wanted to make sure that we hadn't changed that, because I really liked what Chris had described at our last session.
Yes, that has not changed, and that's not being recommended to change from the committee.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions on this part?
And just bear in mind that all any commercial construction can use waterproofing or floodproofing.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
As opposed to residential, it can't.
Sorry to have interrupted.
No, absolutely. These are great questions. Are there any other questions on this? And does the village board agree with the recommended changes?
Yes, no, anybody?
I just
I
need
do.
to study them a little more. This is sort of
That's
the
fine.
first go through. I see nothing that jumps out at me, but there's a lot to digest here.
Right, and we were anticipating that potentially was going to be the situation, so I'll continue walking through this overall report, and then we'll be back before the board again, I think March 9th, and then we can continue that discussion at that point in time.
That's great.
Okay, so dimensional standards. All right, so now we start getting into a little bit of more of the nuances of the code itself. So concerns were raised that the terms large, maximum visibility, encourage are not enforceable in order to avoid unintended consequences. It was recommended that the committee consider eliminating the interior side yards and setback maximums. It was also recommended that the main entrance for civic buildings can be an interior side and not only on the front facade due to safety concerns, as a significant amount of people entering and exiting the building at one specific location. So I'm going to first touch a little bit upon the large, maximum visibility, and encourage. Basically, those three key terms are actually used in a particular section where they're talking about ground story windows and large display windows. So the section itself specifically asks for large display windows to allow for maximum visibility from the viewpoint of the pedestrian. It specifically also refers to, it doesn't dictate the actual size of the windows, and so their transparency requirements are included in the overall code, but we utilize those more subjective terms to kind of provide a little guidance to the, architectural review boards as well as the planning boards, but not to dictate what those windows would look like or the overall transparency. So that's why those more flexible terms were used, but there are specific requirements for the actual transparency of the different building types. The waterfront interior side yard, there are specific requirements for the interior side yards, both minimum and maximums, as part of this, or part of the overlay, and the commenter was suggesting that we remove the maximum interior side yards setbacks. So the waterfront, the waterfront planning committee recommendations, they believed that the recommendations actually for this particular one, that the waterfront planning committee felt that what we currently have, or what is currently there in the waterfront overlay, is appropriate, and that they are not recommending any modifications related to the dimensional regulations at this point. So I just thought I'd take a moment to ask if there's any questions on some of the public comments that came in, especially dealing with, since the dimensional regulations are a little bit more technical in nature. Taylor and myself and Chris are here that we can answer any questions that you have on that.
Is the public allowed to ask a question as well?
I would have to leave that for the mayor. Mayor, you're muted.
At this point, this is a presentation for the Board of Trustees. There will be public comment as part of the meeting, and you can ask that, but also anybody who, this is also a time for you to put in more public comments in writing to the board. So let's finish through with the Board of Trustees, and then we can take any additional comments and public comments. And please do, anybody take this time to write in to comments.
All right, well, should I move on to waterfront and visual access?
Unless the Board of Trustees has anything.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay. All right, so public comments. They were specific comments related to the waterfront overlay, including consider reducing the waterfront access yard to 15%, which is in the current version is 20%. consider permitting off-street truck loading within the visual access yards, eliminate the requirement to the extent practicable that the public right-of-ways include visual extensions of Meadow Street through Long Island Avenue, and then eliminate the requirement of a facade facing a public park and waterfront yard or visual access yard must comply with the front facade. So I thought this would probably be best if we actually looked at an image. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Taylor can share hers, and we can see what we were talking about when we're referring to the visual access. Okay. So A is the required visual access yard. This is just an illustrative example. This isn't necessarily what would be created at every property, but what we're just making note of is that the 20% of the property area needs to have a visual access yard if your property is along the waterfront. And Chris, I don't know if you want to add some of the significance to these visual access yards and the reasoning behind those and why it's very important to have these types of visual access yards.
Well, I think the most important factor is that these standards don't exist anywhere in the zoning ordinance now. So there's no guarantee that as waterfront parcels are redeveloped, that waterfront access, which either currently exists, visual or physical, and that what might exist in the future is guaranteed. So those things need to be built into the zoning code. They can't be general goals in the comprehensive plan. This is a way of taking the village's planning goals that have been stated in plans dating back years, if not decades, and finally building them into enforceable standards. So visual access yards in particular, I think, is one that is less thought about. But as when I toured Sag Harbor with all of you folks back in September, I thought that, the view from Bay Street and from Long Island Avenue back toward the water is an enormously important part of the experience of Sag Harbor and a reason for the intimacy that people generally feel when they're in the village center looking out toward the water. And even if you can't see the water from your own particular vantage point, it's there. And having those openings in each parcel that you can see through at the very least, or in the best case scenario, have public access to, which the height bonus would allow for, if substantial public benefits are granted in addition to the public access. Those are important goals, and will help preserve and enhance the special feel and character that Sag Harbor has.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So are there any questions on the visual access yard from the village board? At this point, the waterfront committee is not recommending any changes to the waterfront, to the visual access yards requirements. Eden?
I have a question. You show on this illustration 2 buildings side by side, and A is a visual access, is the combination of both buildings, of both properties.
So it's actually not 2 properties, it's 1 property.
Oh, I see.
The visual access yard would be, now, again, we're not saying as part of this illustration, because it just came up, a question came up from the committee is, would this property be built like, with 2 large buildings on either side of, with the visual access yard? And we're not saying that's what we're proposing. All we're just simply illustrating here is that if you had 20% of the property, and you had building and building, you would have to have at least 20% of that property available for visual access yard.
So let's say we have adjacent buildings and each one has a visual access yard that are co-joined, that they're side by side. One has it on the east side and the other has it on the west side. Do we have the ability then to be able to ensure that the finishing and however that is treated are aligned so that we don't have 2 different surfaces running side by side? Or how would that be taken care of in the real world?
Well, I think the planning board would have a lot of deference on that. And then also the architectural review board as well. I think that could be probably coordinated with, for example, there'll probably one property will develop first before the other property does. So maybe when they're reviewing the first property, they'll make, whatever determination they make, whether it's like, pavement or, a park area,
would there-
then they'll
would there
coordinate
be-
it with the next.
Would there be a prohibition on a fence or some sort of, so that you don't have you don't have a fence or a wall in between these two properties, so that you would have a continuous space?
Yeah, Chris, you want to talk a little about that? I see you shaking your head.
Yes, well, the visual access yard and waterfront yard require no obstructions whatsoever aside from landscape through the parcel and along the water. And it doesn't allow for really any exceptions, except for objects that help enhance public access, like a bench or a statue or something else that might positively affect the public realm. Now, of course, there's an asterisk on that. What the required visual access yard and required waterfront yard do in lieu of public access is require them to be unobstructed and unbuilt without any structures built in between them, except for those that are typically associated with public access. It is the height bonus as an inducement that would allow for that visual access yard and the waterfront yard at minimum to be available to the public. And the planning board would have the authority, although I think looking at it, it may be strengthened through more specific language, which we've been thinking about, to give the planning board wide latitude in requiring certain types of public improvements within that required public space.
Okay, thank you.
Just maybe a historic note, but in the course of our most recent big waterfront development that was contested and processed for a number of years, an outcome was the creation of a visual access from the sidewalk. And very recently, it was observed that in hand, the construction may have actually reduced that visual access from what the agreements were. So now the village, through its appropriate boards and so forth, are in an enforcement discussion going back to what was an agreement, not a reference to a new code, but simply an agreement. So my only point is, I think the village has appreciated the value of a visual corridor and actually achieved one with difficulty, but did achieve one, and now it has to protect it. So
Right.
this is familiar territory for us.
And I think that's one of the goals of this code, is that, it's you don't no longer have to negotiate. It's something that's required. And then, once you go through, if you go through the height bonus and it becomes public access, it will become identified, part of the resolutions, part of the site plans, and then also any sort of restricted covenants would be clearly put forth and identified and carried with the land.
So the goal is to strengthen the tools
Exactly.
for an outcome like that. I get it.
Great. Thanks, Taylor. We have just two more topic areas, and they're actually the simple, more simpler topic areas. The first actually deals with refuse and service areas. Comment came in specifically with that this particular code should you make need of, for new developments, should incorporate modern methods of waste management and litter. And then also concern was expressed that the permitted locations of refuse in the waterfront lots, since the refuse area must be in the rear yard, but cannot be on the waterfront side, where would the refuse be located? So the committee itself found that the current recommended locations for the refuse in the waterfront overlay is appropriate. We're just saying that it can't be within those required yards, but you can incorporate them within the building or other areas on the site. The waterfront committee has determined that there are no modifications needed. However, they are recommending that the village board evaluate refuse and service area requirements village-wide through an analysis separate from the waterfront overlay, and amend the code later if needed. And that really refers to the more modern methods of refuse. The other public comments that came in on the other topic area was landscape requirements, and I'll just run through these two, and then I'll take comments on both those items. The questions were raised on how invasive species are determined within the code, and that spacing requirements for trees should be established. A question was raised on who determines what street trees cannot be accommodated on the subject site. An additional question was raised regarding whether it's legal in New York State to require off-site planting or contributions to a tree fund if an applicant is unable to comply with the requirements on the subject property. So just our actual, the requirements in the overlay specifically requires that plant materials must be native to Long Island per the Village of Sag Harbor's native plant guide. It also requires that any new construction or additions need to install a minimum of one street tree on the adjacent public right-of-ways for each 30 feet of right-of-way frontage. And where the planning board finds that street trees cannot be accommodated on site, the planning board must, with the concurrence of the superintendent of public works, require street tree installation in alternative locations within the village. So the waterfront committee recommends on this particular recommendations on this one, again, that they found that no modifications are needed related to the waterfront, related to the landscaping. However, it's recommended that the village board review legal comments raised by the public with the Village of Sag Harbor attorney, which, we'll work with Denise just to make sure that allowing for street trees to be planted somewhere else.
Scheduled for tomorrow.
John, you're not on mute.
And then finally, that they're recommending that the village board look at expanding the lists of species that you have currently, and also we recommend specific street trees as part of the overall upgrades to the plant listings, required plant or recommended plant listings from the Village of Sag Harbor. So Aiden, you had a question?
When you recommend a street tree, will we be recommending a caliper of tree, or is that up to the board?
Right. So I believe, Taylor, can you pull up those landscape requirements? I don't have off the top of my head whether we identify caliber.
Can you see it?
Yep, now we can.
So right now we don't have a caliber recommend or required. If that is something that the village board would like us to look into, we can look into some suggestions and work that into the code.
Valerie, I think that ended up on the cutting room floor in our draft making. Easy to put back in if needed.
I'm not an expert in this field, but I do know that there's a phenomenal difference between the cost of a large caliper and a small caliper tree. And I think if we want to maintain some consistency as the work progresses, as work might progress, I'm not the person to talk to about it in specific detail, but I do think it's something that ought to be considered so it doesn't become a bone of contention at every meeting.
That's a good idea. Any other comments on that? Okay. So that basically completes our topic areas for tonight. And then, as I said before, we have to come back with you on the land uses as well as the transportation management demand. But that is a slightly separate issue, and we're still taking public comments on that component. Are there any other questions from the village board for the team tonight?
No, just to say thank you for everything you've done. I'm looking forward to digging into it and unpacking it over the weekend.
Excellent.
And when we talk about height bonuses in general, we're not talking about anything over 35 feet. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Oh, could you clarify for me, is equipment included in that? I know you covered it, but it slipped my mind right now. Is rooftop equipment included in the 35 feet?
So technically it's not right now. And one of the concerns from the committee or one of the recommendations is to provide some sort of maximum on the rooftop equipment.
Yeah, because we've had some issues in the village at various locations from a visibility point of view as to what methods also might need to be used to disguise that equipment.
Chris, did you want to comment on any of that or some methods that you typically recommend?
Well, I think there's always a balancing point in determining what encroachments are permitted on a roof that are typical to modern construction. And I know that given the kind of comments we've received from the public, I think it's our intent to look at that section again and make sure that we've considered every angle from particularly a waterfront visibility standpoint and community character standpoint to ensure that we have the flexibility we need to allow for things that are just typical of new construction, but also keep the visual impact of those obstructions to a minimum, and to require architectural screening of any elements so they're not terribly visible from the public right away.
Right. And a lot of what we've spoken about this evening has been the view from the street, but there's also the view from the water side. As people approach Sag Harbor from the water, that vista is very important. So it would be just as important that whatever code is in place works on all sides of the building so that all approaches are covered.
Right. And I think that was one of the criteria that we're going to look into, is that, you know, looking at maybe requiring some sort of rendering or visual analysis from the water as well as from the street level.
The other purpose of this is also to give the HVAC equipment designers a heads up that, you know, you have to fit this in a certain envelope.
Mm-hmm.
And that's generally not done. What they'll do is just do it the easy way and put a duct here or whatever they got. But this will instruct them that whatever equipment they have, you need to have in this area at this height.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you'd be surprised at how much that could accomplish just by itself, with a little thought.
Yeah, and Bob is right about that, because oftentimes in the site plan review process that the mechanical equipment on the roof is overlooked or not included at all in the site plan submission. And oftentimes the developer or contractor hasn't even thought through those issues in detail at the site plan stage. And this change would require them to think through it architecturally as though they were installing it tomorrow.
I mean, look at the cinema if you want to see an unintended consequence as far as HVAC equipment goes.
Yeah. Do you deal at all with solar panels in this district?
Not specifically, but, you know, as long as they meet the height regulations.
Yeah, we have regulations on solar panels right now, but they appear to be evolving with the advent of new technologies.
Yes.
Especially the Tesla panels, which we have some applications that look more like a slate roof than. And there are national standards for visibility from street. That's fine. I think we're probably covered on that right now. I'm not sure if there's anything to get into there.
Yeah, and do remember that historic preservation trumps everything. So they, you know.
Yeah.
And the current standard you have in your zoning ordinance now is very strict, even more strict than the Secretary of the Interior standards and guidelines. And nothing in the overlay changes them. Although I think I recall there being a lot of discussion, at least internally among our group, about perhaps the need to build in some flexibility, particularly as the technologies evolve.
Yeah, it's something that we're going to be dealing with more and more as time goes on. So it may not be wasted time to spend some time thinking about it and how it might apply to this district.
Great.
Okay. Valerie and Taylor and Chris, if you do want to stay on, we have our budget presentation and then we will get to public comments if you want to stay on to hear any of the public comments that come along from that. So thank you very much. As always, a wonderful presentation. Oh.
Thank you. Very, very.
Thank you.
It's an education.
So tonight is also our first night in our budget calendar. And we are going to have the initial budget is going to be presented to the Board of Trustees. This is a very basic budget. It has been shared with the department heads. It's been shared with the Board of Trustees. The next step is for the department heads, and they've already started this, to come back to us with comments on this. No, I don't need this, and I do need that, and that's more important, et cetera, et cetera. those department heads will work with their trustee liaison and then work with Tim Bullock, our treasurer, to make changes to the attached budget and present a budget and everything else, and then start the balancing act of not having to raise taxes dramatically and yet still afford many of the things that we want. I do want to keep everyone to keep in mind as they look at the budget, if you're looking at it online or to the Board of Trustees, that we are going to be short county dollars, and we don't know what other dollars we may be short this year. So it will be a slim budget, and we are also still looking at revenue. We are not certain that we have our revenue numbers correct. We have to look at a couple other things that are coming in. Again, that's back to the department heads of there's revenue that has not been talked about, et cetera. So don't fall in love with this budget is the best thing that I can say to the public and to the Board of Trustees. And our next 2 weeks will be spent working with our department heads to balance it and try to get some of the things that they might want in there and some of the things that they may not be able to do taken out, or some of the things that they don't need taken out so that they can afford other things. I'm going to leave it up to the board if you want to go through this right now, or if you just want to go through it on paper later on your own time and then with your department heads.
I'm happy to do it later. I've started with D already. We went through it today. We have a little more work to do. I have some questions for Tim, but I need to gather my thoughts on it and reach out by email.
Okay.
And me too. I need the new building inspector to start so we can crank it up.
I would say the same. I need to actually bear down on it. And just a question, Tim, did you include the debt profile that we talked about?
For debt service, we reached out to Munistat, and we actually got a quote based on what they said, and their best reasoning really for us was actually extend the ban another year, and not turn into a TAN or debt service. So what we're going to do is we're going to extend it a year right now and wait until we get the state funds for the Long Wharf project. So that way that if we don't do that and we do the full debt service amount, we may have to revisit it when we do get those funds and get a new interest rate and everything like that. And it's going to cost us probably a little more to redo the debt service.
Okay, so you have that's addressed in the package.
Yep. Yeah, it's under the band interest is the amount for this year that it will cost us at the high end.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
One question, Tim, I'll have for you on sewage treatment plant. Obviously, there's been a fall off on the inflow because business in town with COVID has been off. So we'll need to sit down and see what shortfall is there. I've been tracking it on an inflow basis, but I haven't really been able to collate that with the water bills and the charges and everything else to see what sort of difference that's going to make to our budget there. So I'll be reaching out to you in the next week, so we might spend some time on that.
Okay.
Okay. So the budget has been presented. We will, we will represent something different on March 9th. And then on March 24th, we will have our public comment and move on from there. Correct, Beth? You're looking at me like I'm wrong.
Sorry, the next budget meeting we have is on March 24th.
Oh, okay. So we're not even going to represent at the board meeting. Okay.
No, it gives you a little more time for the department heads to meet with the trustee liaisons.
Good, thank you. Okay, we can now open to public comments. I know people from the cinema are on. Rather than doing the cinema and public comments, can we put that into correspondence for review so that if other people want to talk? As far as public comments, we will take 5, and we do ask that you limit it to approximately 3 minutes. And again, I think the best way is if somebody wants to talk, they unmute and we'll try not to have mayhem. Adam?
So,
Sure. Thank you for taking a look at this. We submitted a letter. I guess we're a little disappointed in the response that we received. There are still things that are conflicting in the code. And I just want to give one simple example. We at Friends of Bay Street have 300 feet of linear feet of access, if you will, on the road. And we're required a 20% visual access, which we're pleased to provide. We want the public to come in. So if you take 20% of 300, that gives you 60 feet, which we support. The problem is in the code, it specifically states the maximum we're allowed on the side is 30 feet on either side of the building. So how do we give you 60 feet visual access if we only have 30 feet on each side? And I think that's just one of the many things that we've identified and would, love to further address these. And I guess we'll write another letter, but that is of grave concern that we can't, it's conflicting. We can't give you 60 feet because you're telling us the most we can give you is 30 feet. I guess the other issue that we have is garbage and refuse, where we must put it on the back of the building, but we can't put it on the back of the building because it's a park. So there has to be some kind of where do we put garbage, and where can we build something that's not visible to the public so that nobody can see it. And third, and these are just the three kind of things that I noticed tonight was, as you know, we're building a theater on that lot, and to not allow us to have an entrance on the side of the building and have 300 plus people congregate on the Long Island Avenue, I think is dangerous. And I would ask that, again, we review that, because I don't want to create a dangerous situation in the building that we're building. We should be allowed to have an entrance or on the side of the building where we'll hopefully give plenty of access, both visual access and also, 60 feet of access, so that way people can easily congregate in that area. I think those are some of our main concerns.
Okay. I don't know we've heard them.
Mr. Agosi has his hand up.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Adam. We will take that back, and we will, be able to clarify that for you at least.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Nat, I take Bob's word that you have your hand up.
Yes, I do. Hi, good evening.
Can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Nat Egosi. I own the Sag Harbor Inn. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me to speak for a few minutes here. Obviously, I'm very particularly interested in the discussion about the hotel. It seems that the decision to include it is based on some thought that it might be of interest to the community, but I'm not hearing that anybody in the community is looking for an opportunity to have another hotel. And currently in the zoning code, there is no definition of how a boutique hotel would be permitted in terms of the criteria. So for example, in the case of my hotel, very specifically, all rooms must be at least 400 square feet, but no larger than 500 square feet, and no cooking is allowed. And that's from a safety point of view. So to the extent something like this would be even considered, you would need to put some boundaries around it. Otherwise, the zoning board would be faced with having to make some decisions about how large could a room be and whether cooking would be permitted. Now, if we took 10 rooms at 500 square feet, that's 5,000 square feet of space that would be permitted potentially for a hotel. I'm having trouble understanding where we're going to find 5,000 square feet. So the number 10 seems to be somewhat arbitrary. The comment was made that in the village on Main Street, we have a hotel and it seems to work well. Well, in part it works well because the owner of the hotel operates the hotel and is a member of the community. There's no assurance that that would happen again in the future. And with regard to the off-street parking, that was a pre-existing condition, and accommodations are made for off-street parking for the American Hotel. I don't know how off-street parking would work with a hotel here. So finally, I just want to make a comment that hotels can very quickly become like an apartment, and it's difficult to have people get out of a hotel room easily. So the question would be, how will the village enforce that the permission to have rooms, up to 10 rooms in a hotel, wouldn't later on just become an apartment complex for 10 rooms? It seems difficult. The village has difficulty sometimes in enforcing some of the code provisions. And there are certainly many loopholes around this topic. Thank you for the opportunity to provide some comments. I'll be following up in writing.
Great, thank you. Do we have other comments? Nope.
Hi, this is Jamie Hook from the Sag Harbor Cinema. I just wanted to clarify, by moving our issue to correspondence, we don't need to discuss it here today. We'll discuss it at another time or through.
Oh, no, we're going to discuss it as soon as we finish with public comment. That's
Okay, sorry, thank you. I just didn't understand. All right, sounds good.
All right. Are there any other public comments? In that case, Jamie Hook, you are on to speak about the cinema, to follow up your visit to us last time. I know you and Trustee LaRocca have spoken. Do you need to share your screen with what you sent to us earlier, or?
I can, if that would be helpful. But let me grab it. I don't know where sorry, I wasn't prepared for that. Here we go.
Well, or I can share mine if you want, but it's.
No, I'll share mine. Am I allowed to share mine? Remember last time
I assume.
Yes, he has screen share capabilities.
Okay, let me figure out where my screen share starts, and then let me share my screen with all of you. So first of all, I wanted to say that very fruitful meeting last time. Thank you guys so much. And I think on the basis of what we heard as feedback from the trustees, in addition to changes in the environment at large, for which, by the way, I want to say we're very excited to open the cinema. As some of you know, we finally got a green light from the governor to do that. We will be doing that, I think, around the end of March. So we would love to look forward to that with all of you. But on the basis of the discussion last time, I believe we are moving towards a different request of the village of Sag Harbor. And this is a much lesser request. And I start from a place of total ignorance through no fault of my own, just because I'm new here. And the request is instead of a fixed screen at Havens Beach, which was something that we'd once wanted to do, to consider a few iterative screenings, minimum of 2, maximum of 4 over the course of the summer. And our preferred venue, and I talked about this with Mr. LaRocca independently, would actually be Marine Park. And so I'm going to share my screen with you now. And we are going to look at this. I think that, here we go. And so we had realized that I think we could make a lot of hay with a much smaller footprint, and basically we could use a new tool that we are beginning to assemble at the theater, which is this van that basically goes around the East End and shows movies. And the benefit of this tool, this van, is that it means that we can show up, we can build a screening environment in about 60 minutes. We can show our movie, and then we can take it down in about 30 minutes after we're done, and everybody goes home, and there's nothing left on the site at all. So I think, given that we'd heard that there was quite a bit of pushback against leaving a big screen up there, this was one way to address that. And given in general the thought that now that the world is changing a little bit, our needs might not be quite so extreme for outdoor cinema. We thought that we could get by with much less. So a new proposal is simply to find time to put a screen environment up at Marine Park. And you can see it on a small picture over on my right there. This is a gridded 8-foot grid that we would be able to obey COVID distance policies. And we would hope to do this a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 4 times over the course of the summer. I don't have fixed dates yet because it's sort of a little early for that, but I'm happy to throw some up if that helps us decide. I'm unfamiliar with what the calendar for that park is over the course of the summer. But this would be the new proposal that we'd love the village to consider. The purpose of these screenings would be to participate in something that we're calling the East End Bike-In Cinema, which is sort of a roving cinematic festival that features films that appeal to people on bicycles. It encourages biking in instead of driving in. It encourages bike culture, and the films could be anything from Breaking Away to Victorio De Sica's Bicycle Thieves to The Triplets of Belleville to E.T., any movie that has a great bike thing. And as I mentioned in our proposal, we're trying to find underwriting to make this free for the people of Sag Harbor, but we can't commit to that yet. So that basically is a retread of our proposal of 2 weeks ago. And you guys all have a copy of it, and I'll stop talking now and answer questions and hopefully let you all go home and go to bed very, very soon. So thank you for listening to me. And that's all I wanted to say. Oh, and let me figure out how to stop sharing my screen without destroying the meeting.
Just jumping in. Jamie is just back to town, and we haven't talked about this specifically. Jamie, if the Marine Park proposal, what would you propose to do with the roadway during an evening?
The roadway would be open as is. We wouldn't close the roadway off at all. I think, the goal would be to do this with the existing infrastructure of the town. Like I said, the point is to encourage people to come with their bicycles, not to drive in and use up parking spaces. Obviously, there's no way to control that, but we wouldn't be shutting down any roadway. The most we'd asked for is perhaps a preferred parking spot for our little van, but that's about it.
Okay. Second question. You and I talked about Steinbeck and Marine.
Yes.
You're choosing Marine. Just tell us why you chose that rather than Steinbeck to seek.
Two reasons. One was the idea that Steinbeck may or may not be quite busy over the summer with things that we can't quite predict and we can't quite know at this time. And the second thing is, and I'll confess to a personal crush on Marine Park. I mean, it's just such a beautiful central little downtown area, and I think it has a real cozy feel. I think it would be, you mentioned that you have music out there already, and it seems like a bit of a downtown plaza to begin with. So we thought that would be an interesting place to put it. And I also like the fact that it's separated from any immediate neighbor by at least a roadway. Obviously, there are people who live in their boats who are close by. But again, we would be doing this minimum of 2, maximum of 4 times in the summer. And in no instance would we be going beyond 11 o'clock at night anyway. So I'm hopeful that the sound issues can be overcome with that kind of a footprint.
And finally, what night of the week are you thinking about?
Any weekend night, which we define as a beginning on a Thursday and ending on a Sunday, that would work for us. So we haven't specifically figured out which of those nights. I think it would take sitting down with the trustees and going over a calendar and kind of throwing a few compromise dates for both of us up in a calendar and seeing what works. But we can be very flexible about that.
Thank you.
Tom.
Yes, just a question. Has anybody run this by our police chief, AJ, and to see about public safety and if any police or traffic is necessary, traffic control? What's that?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I think that's pretty important that goes for any event that we do in the village, that we at least consult with AJ and see, if any extra officers are needed and what the cost to the village is for that.
Okay.
More
than happy.
I updated AJ to the progression from the first proposal, but not since this has come in.
Right.
On first impression, I prefer this idea than what we discussed the last time. There's less inconvenience and discommoding of residential neighborhood. It's a downtown. It'll be sort of an exciting little feature to have in Marine Park. Haven't really thought through all of the aspects of that, but my first impression is I prefer this concept to the one we discussed last time you were here. And thank you for revisiting it and coming back to us with some other ideas. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
The only other events I know of that happen at Marine Park, there's the concerts that we had last year that were minimal, and then there's the fair, the Arts and Crafts Fair. I think that's the only two.
And the concerts are traditionally Thursdays in August.
Yeah.
So that's,
I think staying clear of Saturday night would be a bonus.
yes.
Yeah. That's certainly doable. I mean, a Thursday night is great, a Friday night is great,
Yeah.
and Sunday night can often be quite great. And
I think
given-
Sunday night, it's really like extends the weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, this is an initiative we are working on with the Sag Harbor Cycle Company, and that was another reason why Marine Park kind of jumped a little ahead of Steinbeck Park, in my estimation, is just the proximity to their place of business. And I know that in the summer they have, a tremendously busy culture of bike rides and things like that. So we're excited that they see the value of doing this with us. It's a nice partner to have.
There's no reason why it couldn't alternate. If we found that Marine Park, that the use was too heavy for the local, there's no reason. Everything is mobile.
Absolutely. That's one of the joys of this little idea of a movie van. So it
I think
allows
it's great.
light on the land.
Right. A light footprint.
No, I definitely like this.
One question that we did have, or that's unknown, is obviously Marine Park also has a tremendous benefit in that it has this dedicated toilets right next to the park. And I assume that when you do events there, sometimes they are used. That's something I don't know how the town allocates use of that, but certainly we would hope that it would be possible, because that would change the footprint a little bit. Obviously, if we had to bring in porta potties every week and get them.
I think that could be, we could work that out.
Those are open.
Yeah, they are.
All right, so the next step will be for you guys to put in the formal application, drill down to dates, assume that the concerts will be Thursdays in August. If that changes, we will let you know if those concerts are not going to happen, that they would get that, and I can reach out to them to confirm that. We can go from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, and on to requiring action. The South Fork Natural History Museum requests authorization to place a camera trap at the Bridgehampton Sag Harbor Turnpike. I assume this is the impound lot address, to survey for coyotes. So, scary idea, but nonetheless.
I'll move it.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The next is the authorization to sign the membership agreement with the Hamptons Gym Corp. This is some benefit that we give to the fire department and the ambulance corps for gym membership. Can I get a motion?
So moved.
You, Bob, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We need to extend the temporary cellular facility on wheels, also known as the COW at 23 Redwood Road, WLNG radio site. LNG is going to be going through the process of trying to get a permanent, but until that happens, or until Verizon needs the COW somewhere else, they would like to keep it there. And I think anybody who lives around there would probably like to keep it there, because cell service has been noticeably better on that side of town.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Sir?
Aye. But I have a question. We can do it after.
Okay.
Is this extension under the emergency powers of the village? Because wasn't it initially done as an emergency matter?
Denise, do you remember? I honestly don't remember, Jim.
I can't open this, but in the language of the resolution, Denise, I think
Yes.
there's a reference to emergency.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was conflicted out of this for legal reasons. So Liz Vale handled this. So I don't, but I mean, it makes sense to me that it would have been implemented under the emergency orders because otherwise it would have needed site plan approval. But I shouldn't even
that's
issue
not
an
my
opinion.
question. And that's not the point of my question, but I believe it was done under your emergency powers. And we kidded a lot about the 5-day, the endless 5-day cycle. But
That's correct.
you had a note out the other day that put in a question in my mind about the emergency authority that we've been using to extend the outdoor dining protocols going forward, and made reference to some action in Albany that sounded as if the emergency status of that had ended. So that's why I'm raising the question. It sounded like if we're going ahead on an emergency basis on the cow, what are we doing on Main Street?
That particular one was for the outdoor dining, and as I understand it, once we pass the outdoor dining law, we will stop using the emergency services to move it forward. So that particular, there was a request for something that would normally go to planning, and since we do not have a building, or it would normally go, I'm sorry, I guess to ARB, since we didn't have a building inspector until tomorrow, and with very little knowledge and getting up to speed, I suggested that it go through the regular way rather than through an emergency access to go.
Got it. I know they're anxious to do it, but I was just wanting to understand if your capacity to act under the governor's orders on these kinds of matters is still in place.
I believe it is.
As far as I know, yes.
There's been no pullback of the emergency status, so far as I know. I just want to clarify that.
Yeah.
And they are on tomorrow night's ARB.
Yeah.
docket,
We did make a special request for them to appear tomorrow night for the ARB meeting.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We did get a vote on approving this, correct?
We did.
Okay. Deborah O'Brien, President of the Volunteer Ambulance Corps, requests permission to add Pia Olson-Ferraris back to the insurance rolls. She has come back to the ambulance. Everybody's thrilled to have her. Can I get a motion, please?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. And a second.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And finally, authorization to sign the 2021 Breakwater Yacht Club Amendment, Addendum, and Restatement Lease Agreement. This is allowing Breakwater to take the old mobile pier dock, take it down a little bit, and then use it for their use during the coming summers. And it will go as long as the lease is, which I believe has 17 years left on it.
I'll make the motion.
Thank you.
I'll second it. And Mayor, I see that Luke is on the board. If he may want to speak to it.
Luke, do you have anything you want to say?
Luke, are you still?
I'm just here if there's any questions.
Okay.
Thanks for hearing us.
No.
Thanks for doing it. I think it'll be good. So
Yeah,
we
it'll
have
be
a
an
motion.
improvement. It'll be great. Thank you.
I'm looking forward to it.
Ready to vote?
A second, I think we need.
I second the motion.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. Thanks. And finally, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Oh, one moment, Mayor, excuse me.
sorry.
Mayor, Denise has one additional resolution for you.
I apologize. I have one add-on. The Harbor Committee has requested assistance from a sanitary engineer in reviewing an application that's before them. And the chairwoman reached out to us just, I guess, a couple of hours ago with a proposal from a sanitary engineer. The cost will be borne by the applicant, but since the engineer will be providing advice to the village needs to authorize the engineer to come on board for that purpose. And his fees are, I had it in front of me, Beth, it was
$185 an hour for the
engineer,
and then $135 an hour for the staff engineer.
exactly.
I have no issue with this. Could we just put an upper limit on it that we normally do in these situations?
Oh, sure.
If
Yeah.
there's that they'll have to come back again if there's just so we know once the meter's running.
Absolutely. Yep. What,
I believe Mary Ann thought it wouldn't be more than $1,000 was her.
Okay.
So say 5 hours, $1,000, whatever, however you think it's best worded, it's fine by me.
And this is
Should
the
we just-
applicant. The applicant is paying for this, correct?
That's
not the-
correct. Yeah, the applicant bears the fees,
Yeah. But he is working for us.
Right.
but he is. Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
like to have get
Yeah.
something in there so they have to come back and we can extend it. But just so we know
Makes sense.
where we're going.
Yeah.
So $1,000 sounds fine to me if that's good with the chairperson.
I'll make the motion on that.
I'll second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Thank you.
Aye.
The Harbor Committee says thank you too.
Oh,
All right. If there is nothing else, can I get a motion to adjourn?
so moved.
Okay,
Okay.
all in favor?
Aye.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.